The first thing Caleb Moore heard was the sound a world makes right before it breaks steel, groaning in the dark cables, snapping like rifle fire over the Ohio River. He slammed his boot on the truck's brake as the old suspension bridge lurched beneath him, headlights jerking skyward. Ahead, a black SUV skidded sideways on the ice, slammed into the guardrail, and stopped inches from nothing. Its front half hung over empty air. Its taillights glowed red against the black water below. A woman's scream cut through the wind. Caleb's tow truck slid a few more feet before it stopped. The steering wheel vibrated under his hands. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out the wail of distant sirens and the blare of car alarms going off up and down the frozen span. For a second, he saw another night, another set of lights, another edge. Sand, not ice. Iraq, not Ohio. A truck going over when it shouldn't have. He blinked hard and forced the memory away. The bridge he was on shuddered again. One of the vertical supports buckled, dropping a section of roadway 4 inches in an instant. The SUV's back tire lifted off the pavement. The woman inside grabbed the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Caleb threw the truck in park and stepped out into the freezing air. The wind off the river knifed through his jacket. "Ma'am!" he shouted over the groan of twisted metal. "Don't move!" She turned her head toward him. Through the cracked windshield, he caught a flash of her face. Late 30s, dark hair, expensive coat, terror written in every line. "Are you crazy?" someone yelled from behind him. A man in a delivery van was waving frantically. "The cops said to stay put. The bridge is going down." Caleb didn't even look back. His eyes were on the SUV on the way. The front end dipped a little more with every shift of the bridge. He judged the distance, the angle, the weight. The calculations came faster than the fear. He knew one thing with absolute clarity. If he didn't move now, that woman was going into the river. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. 6 hours earlier, Caleb Moore had been standing under the hood of a rusted-out minivan trying to make a serpentine belt last one more winter it had no business surviving. The heater in his small Cincinnati shop rattled like it was considering retirement. The smell of old coffee and motor oil hung in the air. "Dad." "It's leaning," Ben announced from the corner. His 8-year-old son was hunched over the shop's wobbly card table, working on a science project volcano made out of cardboard and way too much glue. Just like Mrs. King's Camry, Caleb said, tightening the belt with a grunt. "We don't judge, we stabilize." Ben snorted in that way kids do when they're trying not to laugh. "Is that Army talk?" "Something like that." He straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, and checked his watch. Past 7. Too late for a proper dinner, too early to call it a day. A half-empty stack of unpaid bills sat on his workbench, anchored by a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest dad." He didn't mind the okayest part. Some days it felt generous. At 37, Caleb's life was smaller than it used to be. Once he'd been a combat engineer, the guy who knew where to place explosives, so bridges fell for the right reasons, not the wrong ones. Now he ran Moore Auto and Tow, a one-bay garage, and a beat-up midnight blue tow truck he drove on contract for the city. Nights, weekends, whenever they called. The Army had given him medals and nightmares. The garage gave him just enough to keep the lights on, keep Ben in sneakers that fit, and keep from losing the little rented house they called home. What it hadn't given him was sleep. Not the kind that lasted. Somewhere between the oil stains and the second-hand tools he carried a weight no one in the neighborhood knew about a blown call on a dusty road halfway around the world that still woke him up choking on sand and guilt. Dad Ben's voice softened. "You spaced out again. Just thinking, buddy." Caleb forced a smile. "You almost ready to erupt that volcano?" Ben grinned, all gap-toothed pride. "Tomorrow in class. Mrs. Lopez said if it doesn't set the fire alarm off, we didn't try hard enough." The shop phone rang, the old landline mounted on the wall. After 7, that meant one thing: city dispatch. More auto. Caleb said, cradling the receiver between his shoulder and ear. "Caleb." "It's Janet at traffic control," the woman on the other end said, voice tight. "We've got a situation on the Edison Bridge. Ice storms rolling in. High-value vehicle stuck mid-span lanes blocked. You're the only tow close enough." He glanced at Ben now, carefully drawing tiny trees on the side of his volcano. "High value?" Caleb asked. "Mayor's office says it belongs to someone important," Janet said. "Real important. We clear it fast, we keep the grid from locking up. You take it." He hesitated. He'd promised Ben they'd be home early tonight, promised they'd do a practice eruption in the kitchen sink. Then he thought about the bills on the bench, the overdue notice on the power bill, the way the fridge had been mostly condiments for the past 3 days. "Yeah," he said. "Patch the details through to the truck. I'm on my way." He hung up, grabbed his jacket, and ruffled Ben's hair. "Emergency call, champ. City needs the old truck one more time." "Like a superhero," Ben said proudly. "Something like that," Caleb murmured. He locked up the shop, not knowing that by the time the night was over, he wouldn't just be dragging a fancy SUV off an icy bridge. He'd be hanging between steel and sky, trying to rewrite the one part of his past he'd never forgiven himself for. The Edison Bridge looked different when Caleb turned onto the on-ramp, emptier, colder, older. The ice storm had moved in fast, frosting the steel with a slick glaze that made the headlights of every vehicle shimmer like distant ghosts. He eased the tow truck forward, wipers smearing sleet into streaks across the windshield. The radio crackled with updates from dispatch, half of them cautionary, all of them sounding like warnings whispered too late. Traffic had already been stopped several hundred yards back by state patrol. A lieutenant in a heavy parka waved him forward with stiff, impatient motions, like he was annoyed Caleb didn't already know exactly where to be and what to do. When Caleb rolled down his window, the cold punched him across the face. "City tow?" the lieutenant asked, his voice clipped. "Yes, sir. You took your sweet time." Caleb glanced at the clock. He had arrived in 12 minutes. 12 minutes flat. But he didn't argue. The lieutenant leaned in closer. "There's a situation up there. SUV's balanced halfway over the river. Driver refuses to leave the vehicle until someone competent gets here." He stabbed the air toward Caleb like a man poking a disappointment. "You are the someone. Try not to make us regret it." Caleb nodded once, slow. "I'll handle it." The lieutenant didn't seem convinced. "You've got one shot. This thing goes sideways, it's gonna make the evening news in a way none of us want." Caleb rolled up his window and eased the truck forward under the lifting gate. The comment lingered, scraping at him. He wasn't surprised. Men like that always thought a small shop mechanic was one step above roadside debris. He could almost hear the lieutenant's unspoken thought. "Not military anymore, huh? Not the man you used to be." Wind whipped across the bridge, rocking the truck as he drove past stalled cars and clusters of officers crouched behind barriers studying the damaged span. A few gave him looks that weren't comforting, some doubtful, some pitying, some flatly assuming this would end badly. He'd gotten used to those looks over the years. They bounced off the surface. Still, they left dents. When he reached the final barricade, a younger officer flagged him down. "More. The driver's refusing to exit. Says she's not budging until someone explains exactly how she's supposed to be rescued. Better have a plan." He did have a plan, several actually, but none involved performing a rescue on a structurally compromised bridge during an ice storm. Yet here he was, because there isn't a tow operator in the city who would take a call like this voluntarily. Caleb pulled the truck into position, careful to keep his weight well behind the buckled section. The SUV ahead teetered like a seesaw, one back tire still clinging to pavement, while the front half dangled in nothingness. Inside, he could see her, the driver, moving slightly, hands shaking on the wheel. A man in a reflective vest approached Caleb's window and tapped hard. "You can't use your winch," he stated, before Caleb even had the door fully open. "Bridge can't handle the torque." "I know," Caleb answered, stepping out. "But we can run a double line through the anchor rail and counterbalance with—" "Not interested in theories, pal," the man snapped. His tag read, K. Reynolds, Structural Safety. "Nobody needs a cowboy maneuver today. You want to help, fine. Otherwise, stay out of the way and let the people who know what they're doing handle it." Caleb took a breath. This was not the night to fight egos. "What exactly is the plan, then?" Reynolds opened a tablet with frozen fingers. "We're calling in a crane from the county yard." "A crane?" Caleb looked at him. In an ice storm, on a bridge with failing supports, Reynolds stiffened. "Protocol says protocol's gonna kill her." The words came out before Caleb could filter them. Several officers and techs looked up. Reynolds' mouth flattened. "You want to do my job for me more?" "No," Caleb said calmly. "I want her to live." He walked past Reynolds without waiting for permission. Nobody stopped him. Some watched with interest, others with skepticism, all with an unspoken question. What was this tow operator planning to do that a dozen trained responders hadn't? Caleb approached the SUV slowly, palms out, boots crunching across the ice. The bridge groaned beneath him like an animal in pain. From this distance, he could see the driver more clearly. Her hair was pinned up, though several strands had fallen loose. Her breathing fogged the shattered windshield. Her eyes were wide, not panicked exactly, but focused in a way he recognized. That was someone doing math. Someone running through outcomes faster than adrenaline could keep up. He stopped, 6 feet from her door. "Ma'am," he called, raising his voice over the howl of wind. "I'm here to help. My name is Caleb. I'm with the city." Her eyes locked on him instantly. She pressed a button and the cracked window lowered an inch. "Are you the one they said was coming? The specialist?" Caleb almost huffed a laugh. Specialist? If only the lieutenant could hear that. "Yes, ma'am. I'm the one they called. I'm not leaving the vehicle unless you tell me this bridge can hold," she said. Her voice trembled once, barely. "I'm not. I can't." She shut her eyes for half a second. "Please tell me you know what you're doing." He did know what he was doing, but he also knew the limits of physics. "The bridge is unstable," he said gently. "But you're not going into the river. I'm going to get you out, and I need you to trust me." Behind him, someone scoffed loudly. "Trust? He's not even certified for rescue ops." Caleb didn't turn, but he felt the words land. They always landed. "I need you to unlock your door," he told her. She hesitated, then pressed the button. "My name is Harper," she said. "Harper Lane." He nodded. "Okay, Harper. I'm going to come closer." The moment his hand touched the door handle, another voice echoed down the bridge, sharp, irritated, condescending. "What the hell are you doing?" "More." The lieutenant marched toward him, face tight with frustration. "I told you to wait for the crane team. You do not approach a suspended vehicle without authorization." "I'm extracting her," Caleb said evenly. "No, you're not." The lieutenant planted himself between Caleb and the SUV. "You're a tow guy." "A tow guy," he repeated for emphasis, as if explaining something to a stubborn child. "We have protocols for a reason." A few officers behind him folded their arms. Some nodded. Some smirked. A couple exchanged quiet comments Caleb pretended not to hear. Tow guy, not trained. Stay in your lane. It shouldn't have bothered him. It was nothing he hadn't heard before. But tonight, it hit harder, scraping against memories he spent years trying to bury, the last moment someone doubted his judgment, and the lives that were lost, because he hesitated to ignore them. Lieutenant Caleb said, voice low, that vehicle is going down long before any crane gets here. You know that. It's not your call, the lieutenant snapped. Caleb didn't look at him. He looked at Harper Lane, who was staring at the two of them with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Please, she whispered. I don't want to die. The wind rose, lifting the loose fabric of Caleb's jacket. The bridge shuddered again, a long, sickening roll beneath their feet. From the opposite side of the barricade, a shout rang out. Is Daddy working late again? Caleb froze. Ben. He turned sharply, and there he was. His son, bundled in a winter coat, 2 sizes too big, standing beside Mrs. Lopez from the night shift office. She must have driven him over when the news report hit. Ben, stay back. Caleb called the words cutting through the icy air. The lieutenant muttered, Great. Just what we need, family drama. Caleb's jaw tightened. Ben saw the SUV hanging over the river, the flashing lights, the swarm of officers. He saw his father standing alone on the ice-slick steel, while men in uniform glared at him like he didn't belong. And something in the boy's face broke. His shoulders curled in, and he clutched Mrs. Lopez's sleeve. Is he in trouble? Ben asked quietly. He didn't do anything wrong. Caleb felt the words like a punch to the sternum. Harper Lane heard them too. Her hands flew to her mouth. The lieutenant exhaled sharply. Moore, step back. Final warning. Caleb didn't step back. He stepped forward. Harper's eyes widened. The SUV shifted with a metallic groan, half a foot, maybe less, but enough to make officers shout and grab the barricade. The lieutenant grabbed Caleb's arm. Are you insane? Caleb pulled free. Get out of my way. Every head turned. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. This is not a debate, the lieutenant barked. You are done here. And that did it. Not the threat. Not the yelling. It was the look on Ben's face, that small, helpless fear that maybe the world saw his father as something lesser, something unworthy, something that could be dismissed with a single order. Caleb's voice came out steady, quiet, too controlled. Lieutenant, you can fire me, charge me, cuff me, whatever you need to do. But after I get her out of that car. The lieutenant opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, the SUV slid another inch. Harper's scream pierced the wind. Officers lunged backward. Reynolds dropped his tablet, and the bridge loosed a long, low groan that sounded like a warning from the bones of the earth itself. Caleb braced himself. The SUV slid again this time, not a whisper of movement, but a jolt, a violent drop that snapped every conversation, every breath, every nerve ending on that bridge. The sound was unmistakable metal shearing under stress, a moan of surrender from steel that had held for 100 years and was now at its breaking point. Harper Lane clutched the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles bleached white. The front end of the vehicle dipped further. One of the back tires lifted clear off the pavement, spinning freely in the icy air. A dozen officers stumbled backward. The lieutenant shouted something lost in the wind. Someone screamed for everyone to clear out. Someone else yelled for the crane again. But none of it reached Caleb the way it reached everyone else. All he heard was the soft, terrified voice from behind the barricade. Daddy, please don't fall. Ben's words didn't slice through him, they detonated inside him. And for a second, the world doubled. It wasn't the Edison Bridge under his feet. It was that washed-out road outside Fallujah. Sand blowing sideways, a busted engineering rig perched where it shouldn't be, his commanding officer shouting retreat. And a younger version of himself hesitating, calculating, trying to trust a protocol that didn't belong on that terrain. He blinked hard. This time there would be no hesitation. "Harper!" he shouted, forcing all the tremor out of his voice. "Keep your hands on the wheel. Don't shift your weight. You hear me?" Her eyes wide, frantic, blinking fast against the freezing wind locked on his. "I'm trying," she whispered. The SUV creaked, loud, violent final. Caleb turned toward the lieutenant. "Get everyone off this span. Now! This section's about to fail." We don't know that Reynolds snapped from somewhere behind him. Caleb didn't look his way. Yes, we do. The lieutenant hesitated only a second before shouting orders down the line. Officers scrambled, pulling back by 20-30 feet. But Caleb stayed put, boots planted in ice that vibrated with every groan of the bridge. "More step away," the lieutenant shouted. "That's an order." The wind lifted the edges of Caleb's jacket, carrying sleet sideways. He didn't move. He crouched, checking the angle of the SUV, the tension in the frame, the distance between the center of gravity and the fracture in the deck plate. None of it worked in his favor. None of it gave him a clean option. But he didn't need clean. He needed possible. He jogged back to his truck, not far, but every step felt like walking on a frozen drum. He yanked open the storage compartment, grabbed 2 industrial tow straps, a rescue harness, and a heavy steel hook. Reynolds stormed after him. "You can't rig a counterbalance on this surface. It's suicide." Caleb ignored him. "You ever balance a vehicle on a compromised Persian Gulch roadbed during a sandstorm?" he asked quietly. Reynolds blinked thrown. "No, of course not." "Then step back." Caleb returned to the SUV, straps over his shoulder hook in hand. Officers watched him like they weren't sure they were seeing something real. Even the lieutenant didn't bark another order. He just stared. Caleb attached one strap to the vehicle's rear axle, threading the loop through with steady, practiced hands. Then he took the other strap and clipped it to the first, forming a double sling. He ran the length of it back to the rusted lane divider, a thick, ancient steel rail bolted into the bridge's oldest support column. "You're gonna anchor it?" an officer asked breathlessly. "No," Caleb said. "I'm gonna anchor me." The words sent a ripple of disbelief through the watching crowd. He looped the strap around his waist, cinching it twice. Not enough to hold forever, but enough to give him a few more seconds of leverage when the world dropped. He fixed his grip on the strap and leaned back, bracing his boots against the pavement, putting his full weight into countertension. The SUV dipped, then steadied, if only by a hair. Harper gasped inside the car. Reynolds sputtered. "That's not how counterweight physics." "It'll buy time," Caleb said. "That's all she needs." Harper's voice broke through the wind. "What do I do?" "You're gonna listen to me," Caleb said. "That's it." He inched forward, hand over hand, pulling himself toward her while keeping tension on the strap. Every movement had to be precise. Every shift in weight had to be anticipated. "Don't let go," Harper whispered, not to him but to herself. He reached her door. "Unlock," he said. She hit the button. The door latch clicked, but didn't budge. Too much strain on the frame. He tried again. Nothing. He set his jaw, stepped closer, and wedged his shoulder beneath the handle. The metal was cold enough to burn his skin. Caleb, Harper said shakily, "Please don't do anything." But he already had. He drove upward with his legs, delivering a controlled, explosive push. The door broke free. Harper flinched, nearly slipping sideways, but Caleb grabbed her forearm instantly. The bridge dropped just a few inches, but enough to jolt them violently. People screamed behind him. The SUV's front end pitched down again. "Look at me," Caleb barked. Harper did. "You're coming out slowly. Do not panic. Do not twist. Slide toward me. I'm slipping." "No, you're not," he said. "I've got you." Not a promise he gave lightly. Not a promise he'd break again. She shifted inch by inch, moving along the seat. The vehicle dipped harder. The strap pulled against Caleb's waist, digging into muscle and bone. But he leaned back further, using his legs as a final anchor. The strap held. Barely. "Keep coming," Caleb said, voice steady, despite the burn ripping through his shoulders. "You're doing perfect." Her hands reached the edge of the seat. She pushed forward. The bridge snapped. A section of plating beneath the SUV gave way with a thunderous crack, metal ripping like a scream. The front end plunged down several feet, dragging the rest of the vehicle with it. Caleb's body jerked violently, the strap yanking him forward. His boots skidded across the ice. Officers behind him shouted, someone lunged but couldn't reach him. Harper screamed. Caleb roared not a word, just effort, digging in, planting his heels, fighting physics with every muscle he had left. "You're not falling," he shouted. Whether to her or himself, he didn't know. Harper lunged instinctively toward him. Caleb let go of the strap with one hand and grabbed her wrist, pulling her against his body as the SUV tore free completely and plunged into the river below. The strap whiplashed. The anchor rail shrieked. The entire bridge shuddered from the shifting weight. Caleb and Harper toppled backward onto the pavement. He pulled her into his chest, rolling them away from the jagged edge until they were clear, just as a final chunk of steel slid free and splashed into the dark water below. Silence followed, not the absence of sound, but the stunned vacuum that comes after the impossible has already happened. Harper lay trembling in his arms, clutching his jacket like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Across the span, officers stared. Reynolds' tablet clattered from his hands. The lieutenant's mouth hung open. And behind the barricade, Ben stood unmoving, eyes wide and shining with something beyond fear-awe. Caleb helped Harper sit up, brushing wind-whipped hair from her face. Her voice came out as barely a breath. How did you—" "I wasn't letting you go," he said quietly. The lieutenant finally found his voice, but not his authority. "More. That was, Reynolds stepped forward, looking pale. "That counterbalance. That shouldn't have worked. That shouldn't have—" "It did," Caleb said. Harper gripped his hand. "You saved my life." Caleb didn't respond right away. His gaze was fixed on his son, small, brave, watching him with a pride so fierce it cracked something open inside. For the first time in years, Caleb felt the weight of his past shift, not disappear, but change. Not guilt dragging him backward, but purpose driving him forward. The crisis had passed, but its consequences were just beginning. Because everyone on that bridge now knew something no one had known an hour earlier. Caleb Moore was not just a tow operator. He was something far rarer. A man who ran toward the breaking point and held on when the world gave way. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. Not the officers who had doubted him. Not the structural tech who had mocked his judgment. Not even the lieutenant, who only minutes earlier had ordered him to stand down. The wind cut across the fractured span, carrying sleet, and the echo of the SUV's splash far below. But no one moved. All eyes were on the two figures sitting on the pavement. Caleb Moore and Harper Lane alive when they absolutely should not have been. Harper was still gripping his sleeve, her breath unsteady, her eyes unfocused, as if her mind was trying to catch up with what her body already knew. She had come within inches of falling into the dark water beneath them, and a man she'd never met before, had held her against gravity-steel time and pure disaster. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't have been able to do that." Caleb didn't answer. He was too busy listening to the bridge's groans, ensuring the worst of the collapse had passed. The ground beneath them was still trembling with residual tension, but the immediate danger seemed gone. He gave a slow nod toward the lieutenant. "It's safe enough now. Bring blankets. Medical checks." His voice was quiet but steady, controlled, commanding. The officers didn't hesitate this time. They moved instantly. The lieutenant approached cautiously, like he was walking toward a man he no longer understood. He knelt down beside them, his breath forming a cloud in the wind. "Moore, what you did back there? There isn't a guy on my team who would have even tried." Caleb didn't meet his eyes. His focus was on Harper, checking her for injuries. "Is your neck okay? Any pain in your back? You hit pretty hard when the car dropped." She shook her head, tears finally escaping down her cheeks. "You saved my life." Behind them, Ben ran past the barricade before anyone could stop him. The boy barreled into his father's arms with more force than Caleb expected, his small hands gripping around Caleb's ribs like he was afraid they would fade if he let go. "Dad," his voice trembled against Caleb's chest. "I thought you were gonna fall." Caleb held him tighter, pressing his cheek to his son's cold hair. "I'm here, buddy. I'm right here." Officers who had looked at Caleb like a problem an hour ago now watched the reunion silently shifting awkwardly, or wiping sleet from their eyes a little too roughly. Even Reynolds, the structural tech, seemed undone, his earlier arrogance replaced by something closer to shame. Harper's gaze drifted from Caleb to the officers, then back to Caleb again. She studied him not as the man who had rescued her, but as someone whose actions didn't match his job title. "You're not just a tow operator," she said quietly. The lieutenant straightened, clearly interested in that question as well. "More. That harnessing technique, the counterweight, the way you read the tension lines on the deck, you don't learn that in an auto shop." Caleb said nothing at first. He rested one hand on Ben's back as though grounding himself. Harper pushed gently. "Who taught you to do what you did?" "That wasn't improvisation. That was experience." The wind howled through the open gap where the SUV had fallen. Snowflakes skittered across the broken pavement. Caleb exhaled, slow and controlled. "I used to work with Army combat engineering. Bridge integrity. Load-bearing calculations. That kind of thing." Reynolds blinked in surprise. "You were military?" "That wasn't in your file." Caleb gave a hollow half-smile. "Not everything makes it into the city paperwork." The lieutenant crossed his arms, not confrontational now, but curious. "What unit?" Caleb hesitated. Ben looked up at him, waiting. Harper did too. There was no hiding anymore, not after tonight. "1st Engineer Battalion. Forward operations. We handled structural breaches, vehicle extractions, improvised anchor systems, sometimes under fire." Reynolds's face flushed as the realization hit he'd lectured a decorated Army engineer on basic mechanics. Harper's hand moved instinctively to her heart. "That's how you knew the bridge was going to fail?" "Yeah," Caleb said softly. "You hear enough bad metal in your life, you never forget the sound." He didn't elaborate. He didn't tell them about the road outside Fallujah, the collapsing rig, the mistake in timing that haunted his sleep. Tonight was not about confession. But the lieutenant wasn't done. "Moore, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you say you had that background?" "Would it have mattered?" Caleb asked quietly. "I'm a tow operator to you. That's it." The words landed like cold rain. Harper wiped her eyes, her voice steady despite everything. "It matters to me." Reynolds stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Look, Moore, I was out of line earlier. I assumed you were well. I underestimated you. Badly. I shouldn't have." Caleb didn't gloat. He didn't even look satisfied. He simply nodded, accepting the apology without letting it take up any more air than necessary. Ben leaned into him, still shaken, still clinging. Paramedics arrived with blankets checking Harper and offering to evaluate Caleb. He refused the stretcher, but accepted the blanket for Ben, wrapping it around his son instead. As they moved Harper onto a secondary assessment area, she grabbed Caleb's hand. "Please don't leave without talking to me." He blinked. "Why?" "Because I want to understand what happened tonight, and because I'm not going to forget it." She held his hand for a beat longer than necessary, then let go when the medic insisted on checking her vitals. As Caleb stood, the lieutenant approached again, hands tucked into his heavy coat expression, thoroughly changed. "Listen, Moore, I'm filing my report tonight. There'll be an investigation, statements, procedures. But before any of that, I want to say thank you. You saved her. You kept that whole segment from collapsing with her inside." Caleb nodded. "Anyone would have tried." The lieutenant shook his head. No, they wouldn't have," Reynolds added. "And none of us would have known how." For the first time that night, Caleb felt the weight in his chest loosen. Just a little. Enough to breathe. As emergency crews began stabilizing the rest of the bridge, the lieutenant motioned him aside. "There's something else." He lowered his voice. "When the mayor hears what you did, there's going to be talk. Opportunities. Requests." Caleb frowned. "Requests. Search and rescue. Emergency structural response. Civil disaster assessment." The lieutenant shrugged. "We need people who don't fold under pressure. People who know what they're doing when things break. People like you." Caleb looked out at the icy, dark river at the crushed gap where the SUV had vanished. He hadn't thought about doing anything other than fixing cars and towing broken ones for years. Quiet work, predictable work, safe work. Then he looked at Ben, his son, his anchor, now warming under a blanket, watching his father with a pride that made Caleb's throat tighten. "Dad," Ben asked softly, "are you going to be in trouble for helping her?" Caleb crouched beside him and brushed the boy's hair back. "No, buddy. Not this time." The lieutenant stepped back to give them space, but his words kept hovering in the cold night air like a new road waiting to be taken. Opportunities. Requests. A path he'd once walked away from because he thought he wasn't worthy of it anymore. Harper, now seated in the ambulance, lifted her head and looked for him. When she found him, her expression softened, grateful, shaken, but full of something else too. Recognition. The kind that only comes after witnessing the truth of someone. Caleb, the paramedic, called. "She's asking for you." Harper extended a hand toward him. The lieutenant's words lingered. Ben looked up with hopeful eyes. And Caleb realized the night wasn't finished shaping him. Not yet. Whatever came next, whatever offer was coming, whatever decision he would have to make, it wouldn't be small. It wouldn't be simple. And it sure as hell wouldn't let him go back to pretending he was just a tow operator from a one-bay garage. The world suddenly wanted something more from him, something he wasn't sure he could give. But as he took Ben's hand and walked toward the ambulance, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from the man he used to be. He was walking straight into whatever waited next. The ambulance doors had barely closed behind Harper when the shift in the air became unmistakable. Officers who had stiffened at Caleb's approach an hour earlier now stepped aside for him without hesitation. Some nodded. Some murmured quiet thanks. Even Reynolds, still shivering from cold and embarrassment, managed a respectful, "Glad you were here more." Harper reached for Caleb's hand before the medic could pull her focus back. "If you hadn't been on this bridge tonight," her voice wavered, but the gratitude in her eyes was steady. "Please don't disappear after this is over." She wasn't the only one who didn't want him to disappear. The lieutenant returned with a more formal tone, but the edge was gone. "Moore, I spoke with the mayor's office. There's interest in bringing you on as part of the city's emergency structural response team. Training salary benefits the whole package. They saw footage from the drones. They know what you did." He paused almost sheepishly. "We all know what you did." Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at Ben, wrapped in his blanket, smiling with a pride too big for his small frame. That was the answer. "Tell the mayor I'll come in Monday," Caleb said. The lieutenant smiled, the real kind. As the night wound down and tow crews began clearing debris, Caleb helped Ben into the truck. Harper watched them drive off from the ambulance bay, one hand pressed to her heart, her expression warm in a way that made the cold feel softer somehow. By morning, the footage had gone viral. Grainy cell phone clips showing a tow operator anchoring himself to a failing bridge and hauling a stranger out of a death drop. Reporters camped outside Moore Auto and Tow before Caleb even opened the garage. Neighbors stopped him at the gas station. Folks he'd known for years suddenly talked to him like they were seeing him clearly for the first time. But the most unexpected visitor showed up 3 days later. Reynolds, the structural tech, walked into the shop holding 2 coffees and a look that could only be described as humbled. "Moore, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you respect. You saved that woman. You saved all of us from a bigger collapse. I misjudged you." Caleb accepted the coffee and nodded. "It's all right. It won't happen again," Reynolds said. And from the way he said it, Caleb believed him. On Monday, the lieutenant escorted Caleb into a city office where HR reps, emergency coordinators, and a handful of officials greeted him like he was the missing piece they'd been looking for. They laid out the role Special Assignment Responder Bridge Integrity Consultant Field Leader for rescue operations. It wasn't glory. It was purpose. And for the first time in years, he felt the pieces of his life reassembling into something that made sense. That evening, Ben climbed into Caleb's lap as they ate dinner on the couch. Mac and cheese, the one dish Caleb never managed to burn. "Dad," Ben asked, "does this mean you're a hero now?" Caleb smiled softly. "No, buddy. It means I stopped running from the parts of me that know how to help." Ben considered that, then leaned his head against his father's chest. "I like that." So did Caleb. 3 months passed. Winter loosened its grip, and spring sunlight spilled across the city in long golden stripes. The Edison Bridge underwent months of repairs, but locals still talked about the night it almost went, and the man who refused to let it take someone with it. Caleb's role with the city grew quickly. He attended training sessions, led structural reviews during storms, taught emergency crews how to read tension shifts the way he could hear them. The nightmares that once dragged him backward now had somewhere to go toward preventing what kept him awake at night. Moore Auto and Tow didn't close. It evolved. He hired another mechanic, someone young and eager, freeing Caleb to split time between the shop and the city's rescue division. The garage that once barely survived now had steady business, most of it from people who wanted their cars fixed by the bridge guy. And then there was Harper, Her injuries were minor, but she insisted on bringing dinner to the shop every week as thanks, then twice a week. Then she started lingering, helping Ben with homework, asking about torque and engine compression like she genuinely wanted to learn. One evening after Ben had gone to bed and the shop was locked up, she slid a folder across Caleb's workbench. "What's this?" he asked. "A proposal," she said simply. "A partnership. The city wants a dedicated civilian advisor with real-world experience, someone who isn't afraid of disaster but doesn't chase it either, someone who understands the value of staying calm when everyone else panics." Caleb flipped through the pages. The position was tailored for him. "You could have written this without my name," he said. "You could have passed it off to anyone." "I didn't want anyone," Harper answered. "I wanted the man who saved my life." He looked up slowly. The air between them softened the way ice melts under a warm hand. By the end of the evening, he didn't sign anything. But he didn't say no. 1 year after the collapse, the repaired Edison Bridge reopened with a small ceremony, no ribbon cutting, no fanfare. Just city workers, a few officials, and Caleb standing with Ben on his shoulders. Harper arrived late, breathless, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate and a smile that still hit him in the chest. The lieutenant approached, slapped Caleb's shoulder, and nodded respectfully. "Couldn't have rebuilt this section without your input." Caleb shrugged lightly. "Just doing my part?" "Hell of a part," the lieutenant replied. Ben tugged Caleb's sleeve. "Dad, look. They put your name on that sign." There it was, etched on a small bronze plaque near the repaired support beam. "In honor of those who run toward the breaking point and hold on." Caleb wasn't mentioned by name. He didn't need to be. He lifted Ben higher on his shoulders. "Pretty cool, huh? Cooler than the volcano we made," Ben declared. Harper leaned in close. "You know, you rebuilt more than a bridge this year." Caleb looked out at the skyline, the river reflecting streaks of sunlight, the repaired steel catching new life. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I rebuilt a little of myself too." Harper touched his hand. Ben grinned down at both of them. And for the first time in a long, long while, Caleb felt steady. Some bridges collapse, some bridges hold, and some bridges built from courage, forgiveness, and second chances carry us farther than we ever meant to go.